Going into the new year, I really want to add a lot more organization to my shop. I know it's going to save me a ton of time to stop searching through drawers for all of the tools that I'm looking for. And I've been thinking, this spot right here is the perfect spot for a large pegboard storage cabinet. So I've partnered with Craig Tools to build this cabinet. I'm going to be using their adaptive cutting system, which makes it really easy for a person to cut down an entire sheet of plywood all on their own. And then I'm using the Craig pocket hole jig to quickly put together this cabinet that is going to have tons of space on top for organizing tools on a pegboard and space on the bottom to store some of my most used sizes of screws. To get started, I cut out all of the pieces for the cabinet that will hold the pegboard on my Craig ACS. And I love using the ACS because it makes it easy for me to break down sheets of plywood all by myself without having to have an extra set of hands, especially these thick 3/4 inch sheets. For this cabinet, you can get into all the cuts you need on half a sheet of plywood. So if you've got scraps, which is what I ended up using, it's a really great opportunity to use some of those up and clear out the scrap bin a little bit. Or if you don't have enough scraps, you can get 2 storage cabinets out of 1 sheet of plywood, which will be really great for adding tons of storage in your shop. Once all the pieces were cut, I used the ACS and reset the blade so that I was only cutting through 1/4 inch. It took a couple times to get that 1/4 inch just perfect on my blade, and I used my Craig multi-mark tool, which is the perfect option for checking depth in these nice little grooves. And then I used it to cut a groove just big enough for the size of my pegboard sheet. Now my pegboard is 3/16 inch thick. And so I ended up doing 3 passes with the ACS and moving it 1/16 each time. And that was perfect with the kerf of the plunge saw to get that perfect 3/16 inch groove to hold the pegboard. Now I put this groove 1 1/4 inches away from the back, and that is going to allow a 3/4 inch space for the French cleat that we're going to be hanging this with, as well as a 1/2 inch gap between the French cleat and the pegboard. And the reason for the gap is so that I don't lose any of those pegboard spaces because they won't bump up against that French cleat. I've got plenty of room for my pegboard to work. Now it might be a good idea to check what pegboard you're using and see if you need to adjust this groove spacing at all to make sure that you don't lose any of those pegboard holes so you can have the most organization possible with this system. Now once all of those grooves are finished cutting out, it's time to add some pocket holes. And I love using the Craig 720 Pro for pocket holes. It makes quick work of all of the pocket holes, but my favorite feature has got to be the dust collection. It keeps those dust at a minimum as you're drilling out pocket holes in all of these boards. Now I'm going to be adding pocket holes to the top and the bottom boards, which are the shorter boards with the groove in it. Now these boards, I'm going to add the pocket holes on the opposite side of the board as the groove, so that the groove is the inside of the cabinet and the pocket holes will be either on the top or underneath so they're not visible. I also add pocket holes to the 4.5 inch thick pieces, and all of the cut lists and all of this is detailed on the plans that I'm sharing on craigtool.com. I'll make sure to put a link to that in the description. So on the 4.5 inch pieces, these are going to be my shelf boards. So I'm going to add pocket holes to both edges of those to attach inside the cabinet, as well as a few across the front. This will allow me to attach a lip to the front of the shelf as well to hold all of the screw boxes and containers and keep them from falling out. Now that all the boards are cut, pocket holes are in, it is ready to start assembling. Now before we can assemble the complete cabinet, the shelf boards need to be assembled first. And these are very easy to assemble. We're taking the front shelf piece, which is all detailed in the plans, and just attaching it to the front of the shelf board. And this is going to give it just a little bit of a lip. So when you place any boxes of screws or other things to store on the shelf that we're going to install at an angle, it shifts it right to the front and it holds it right in place. And because I'm working with 3/4 inch stock, I am attaching all of my parts together with 1¼ inch Kreg pocket hole screws, and since I'm using plywood, I am using a coarse thread screw. I love using the Kreg 90-degree clamp. Whenever working with a 90-degree angle with my pocket holes, I can use it to hold my boards in place as I secure it with the remaining pocket holes all the way down, and I just adjust it for these very long ones. Now with all the pieces ready to go, it's as easy as attaching them in the shape of a box. And what I'm going to be doing is starting with one side. So I take one side board, and this is the long one with the groove in it, and the area with no groove is going to be the bottom where the shelves go. So I'm going to attach all the boards to one side, the top, the bottom, the two shelf boards. Then once it's all attached together, and again I'm using the 1¼ inch Kreg pocket hole screws and attaching it with wood glue to make sure this is a nice and sturdy cabinet box. Then I can slide in my piece of pegboard that I already cut out on the ACS. I did want my pegboard to be painted white, but I'm leaving the frame the natural plywood color. So I did give it a quick coat of paint right before sliding it in to my cabinet box fully assembled. And with that all in place, it's just as easy as attaching the second side. Lining everything up so that I've got a nice square box with all of the pieces of the pegboard nicely tucked into the groove. I attach the other side with my pocket hole screws and wood glue. And just like that, I have this giant cabinet. And I love the shelf. So the smaller shelf works perfect for these smaller screw containers. And then the bottom shelf is perfect for these. And they just slide right towards the front and stop on that lip. And this is going to be able to hold a ton of my favorite screws. So next up is hanging it on the wall. Now this is a large cabinet. We definitely want to make sure it's nice and secure. So that's why we're going to be using a French cleat to hang it on the wall. And that's what the last two plywood pieces are cut for. Now a French cleat is my favorite way to hang anything heavy on the wall. It makes it super easy to hang, and you're not trying to hold that heavy item up against the wall. Because what we do is you set a table saw or a circular saw to cut at a 45-degree angle, and you rip these boards that we have saved for the French cleat in half, right down the middle at a 45-degree angle. Now, like I said, you can do this with a circular saw. I use my table saw. It makes it nice and easy. Now, if they're not perfectly centered on that piece of lumber, it doesn't matter. You just want it to be as close as you can get it. The French cleats are then attached to the back of the cabinet. We're going to attach one piece to the back of the cabinet, right up at the very top, and then about 4 inches from this bottom shelf. And the reason we need to leave a nice big gap is so that we have plenty of space to attach it to the wall by seating it on top of the other French cleat. If it's too close, you won't be able to get it attached. And when you attach these, you want the long side, since this is cut at a 45-degree angle, one side is longer than the other, facing the back of the cabinet and the short side facing the front of the cabinet. Then you attach the second piece to the wall, and this one is attached so the long side is facing you and the short side is up against the wall. Make sure that as you attach these French cleats to the wall, you're using a countersink bit. I love the Kreg quick flip for this. I'm going to just attach it with 2½-inch pocket hole screws right into the studs on my wall with the countersunk bit. That means the front of my French cleat is flat. Might not be as big of a situation for this cabinet because we do have that 1/2-inch gap between the pegboard and the French cleat, which would allow you to have a proud screw. But any other time you're using a French cleat, you definitely need to make sure that that is nice and flush. Once you've got your French cleats attached to both places, all it takes is a nice lifting, and then when you slide the cabinet onto the cleat on the wall, those two boards will seat. Now, to make it a little bit easier to seat the two boards together, the board that is going to be attached to the back of the cabinet is still the full length because it is sitting between the two boards. But I'm going to cut, just with my miter saw, the French cleat piece that I attached to the wall after I ripped in half, about a 1/2 inch to 1 inch short. This allows me some wiggle room on both sides, so if that is really tight on the back of the cabinet, I don't have to fight it when it sits onto the wall. And then you only have to worry about gravity holding that into place. It is nice and secure, and it is time to load up your cabinet with all of your favorite tools. I loaded up my pegboard with all of my most used tools, and I love that I still have a ton of space here for new tools as they come into my shop. And I loved using the French cleat to hang this cabinet because I was able to lift the cabinet all by myself onto the wall, and this thing is sturdy. So if you're ready to get organized in your wood shop or garage, make sure to check out the build plans on craigtool.com. I will put a link in the description below. And then visit me at housefullofhandmade.com, where I like to share lots of fun things to build to keep you organized in the new year.